Welcome to The Balancing Act, the podcast for mastering work, wealth and well-being, with me, your author and host, Sarah Brennand. Here we explore conversations, insights and expert advice through the lens of what truly drives high performance and sustainable success, aligning your money and mission, strengthening your mental and physical health, and creating a more intentional work-life balance. Each week, I'm joined by leaders, professionals and specialists who share how they navigate their own balancing act, along with practical tools and strategies that you can apply in yours. Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Sarah Brennand, executive coach, strategic educator, and author of the book Balancing Act, Mastering Work, Wealth and Wellbeing. Now, there's a strategy behind high performance and sustainable success, and it really starts with you mastering your own balancing act across these key areas of whole life success. In this episode, I'm going to be introducing you to the core framework that underpins everything in this series, the Calibration Model. This is the model I use with my coaching clients, with leadership teams, and with organisations worldwide who are managing pressure, growth, they're scaling businesses, and they're moving through and working through change and transition. Those who are doing well and those who want to do more, those who want to do better still. It sits at the centre of how I think we should be thinking about sustainable success. Because the reality is this: most capable, driven professionals are not struggling because they lack ambition. They're not short of ideas. They're not unwilling to work hard. They have high work ethic, but they're operating often without a clear structure to understand how everything, not just work or money or a particular relationship in isolation, but how everything they're managing actually interacts. And over time, this creates pressure. So today I'm going to give you a structure for you to achieve not just isolated success, but sustainable, long-lasting success. So let's start with the problem. Why effort isn't always the answer. In my role, I've had the privilege of working with many high performers, people who are achieving at a really high level in their field or their area of work. And to be clear, most of them are doing incredibly well. They're building strong careers, creating opportunities, and in many cases, living a life that they're genuinely proud of and one that they really love. But there is also a significant number who, from the outside, are seen or perceived as high performers. And yet, when you look a little closer, a consistent pattern starts to emerge. And it might be one that you resonate with or familiarise with. On the surface, they're doing well, they're progressing, delivering results. But beneath that, something isn't quite aligned, it's not quite working as well as it should do. There's a sense perhaps of pressure building. It is harder to make decisions. The feeling of energy and motivation is becoming inconsistent. The default response is usually to increase effort. We work harder, we push more. But the issue isn't effort, it's usually structure. And more specifically, it's a misunderstanding of how performance actually works. We tend to assume that high performance should look like this straight, high line, this consistent output, this steady progress, always operating at a high level. But biologically, that is not how we are built. If you think about a heart rate monitor, think about what Dr. John Sullivan said. A flat line doesn't represent peak performance. It represents the absence of life. The same principle applies to your performance, your whole life performance. Human performance is designed to oscillate. As individuals, we see this, we understand this in physiology. Science tells us this. Every breath that we take follows a cycle. We inhale oxygen, expanding the lungs, the diaphragm moves upwards, and then we exhale. Carbon dioxide, goes out and the diaphragm moves back down again, and continuous movement, this is what sustains our life. If we try to hold our energy, our pressure in one place, if we stay in one state too long, that system breaks down. Carbon dioxide would build, oxygen would drop, and our body wouldn't sustain it. Performance across our life, across our work, works in exactly the same way. There's this natural oscillation between output and recovery, between effort and renewal, between focus and release. And this is supported by research in human performance science. It should feel obvious as you're listening to this. The ultradian rhythms show that we can only sustain high focus for around 90 to 120 minutes before cognitive performance declines and recovery is actually required. It's necessary. So the difference between those who sustain performance and those who peak and burn out is not capacity. It's not the ability. It's understanding. It's self-awareness of recognizing when we need those rest periods. High performers, those we see as high performers, are not always operating in that peak level. They've just learned how to move between states better. They know when to push. They know when to recover. They've built up resilience. They've built up understanding. But importantly, they don't confuse one with the other. And here's where the real issue can sit, because many people learn how to master success, master pressure in one area of their life. We see executives, I've seen executives who've built significant financial success, but have no time or capacity for family or friends, or who have athletes performing at the highest level, but struggling financially or personally, or in transition after sport. You see individuals who've created really strong careers, have family lives, who've built financial structure, but they don't have the financial scaffolding for the future life that they want. People optimize one part of a system, but not often that system as a whole. And over time, this can create a different type of pressure, because what's been left unattended to, it doesn't disappear, it compounds. So true high performance, true sustainable success is not about maximizing one area at the expense of others. It's about ensuring that every area that matters, and this is key, that matters to you is represented, recognized, and consciously accounted for. And the things that matter will differ between us. They don't need to be attended to equally, but they do need to be intentional, so that trade-offs are made, that you're aware of them, and they're not left to become future regrets. Without structure to see that clearly, people default to reacting instead of leading. And that's where the calibration model really comes into its own. Introducing the calibration model. So this is where the calibration model really comes in. At its core, it's built on a simple but really important principle. Sustainable success is created through alignment across the key areas of your life and work, not by focusing on one, not by over-optimizing another, but by understanding how they really work together. Within the model, there's 3 core paradigms. There's money and mission, there's mental and physical health, and there's work and life. And now the key here is that the model brings these areas into conscious awareness, because most people, for most people, these aren't things that we actively step back and evaluate together. Quite often we respond to what's in front of us, manage pressure as it shows up. But we're not always seeing how one area is influencing another, often until it's too late. That's what the model allows and enables you to do better. It gives you a clear way to step back, to see the system, your key areas across your life as a whole. Not as independent areas, because they operate as part of a system. And like a system, they are in constant connection and motion. There's that ripple effect. Because performance, as we've explored, it isn't a straight line, it moves. Our energy, our focus, our motivation, our output, they all rise and fall, and they should do, because that's natural. And when we understand that, we can start to work with it rather than against it. And that's where calibration comes in. It's not about maintaining a constant state. It's about making informed adjustments as things shift, so you can stay effective even as and when, because they will, when demands change. To help bring this to life, if you're watching this as a visual podcast, you'll now see the model on screen. For those of you who are just listening, imagine a circle, a bit like a pie chart, made up of equal segments, think of a cake in the slices. Each segment represents a key area of your life. There's money, and then mission sits across the circle opposite it. There's mental and physical health having their own segment opposite each other on the circle. And then there's work and life, again, sitting opposite each other. They're not opposing because of a sense of competing. They are connected, they influence each other, they actually build and underpin each other. Sometimes there's a trade-off for time or focus, but they always support each other, mechanically, psychologically, physiologically. Now, an important part of this is that sometimes many people overlook is having clarity on what success looks like for them, for you, in each of these areas. Because if you don't define that, decisions get made by default. Time gets allocated to what feels pressured, what's urgent, and energy goes where the pressure is. We focus on the things that are challenging us. Over time, this can mean that certain areas of our life get neglected, not intentionally, but just because they weren't consciously prioritized. And that's where this model becomes really useful, really practical, because it enables you to set direction, to set goals across all areas of your life that matter, and importantly, to you. So when trade-offs are made or needed, because they will be, you make them consciously, not reacting in the moment, not drifting over time, not choosing, in that moment, but choosing purposefully. Because people don't get frustrated by the things they did. They get frustrated by the things they didn't do. The financial freedom they didn't build, the time they didn't protect for their family, the opportunities they didn't give enough attention to. Not through lack of ambition. We've talked about this. You're all really capable, but not doing something because of a lack of a structure, because success in one area should really never ever come at the unintended cost of another. Not intentionally anyway. Now, within the circle, within that calibration model, there's 3 inner circles, and these are your calibration tools. They set within the model and they cut across all of these areas, meaning that when you strengthen any one of those, you don't just improve one part of your life, you actually improve how your whole system operates. And these tools are emotional intelligence, skilled communication, and your resilience advantage. And they all, within the book, if you have it, they've all got a whole chapter on them. And we'll come on to those a little bit shortly. But let me just tell you a bit more about each of the paradigms first, because these are the areas of your life that you want to pay attention to if you're genuinely serious about achieving that high level of success that you can sustain over a long period of time. So the first paradigm is money and mission, and this is about direction, how you create value, how you generate income, and whether that aligns with what actually matters to you. When this area is aligned, decision-making tends to feel clearer and easier, and there's a much clearer sense of direction, a level of confidence behind the choices that you're making. And there's a good reason for that, because actually research shows that when we're doing something that's aligned with our personal values, our engagement increases, our productivity improves, and long-term satisfaction is a lot higher. At a neurological level, purpose-driven work actually activates our dopamine pathways, which is linked to an increased motivation and goal-directed behaviour. So when you're doing something that matters to you, your brain actually supports you in doing it well. But this paradigm goes deeper than just alignment. It's about how you build a life you actually want to live, and whether the financial structure supports that. Because money in this context is not the goal, it's actually the enabler. And at times it can be the constraint. In my book, I talk about the idea of financial scaffolding, not as a static number, but as a structure that evolves over time. There are 3 broad stages. Not enough, where the focus is stability, covering essentials, reducing pressure. Then there's enough, where there's security, choice, and the ability to think more strategically. And then there's plenty, where resources can be directed towards impact, legacy, or long-term projects. Where you are within the structure shapes how you make decisions, because when you're operating from not enough, decisions are often reactive. When you reach enough, you create space. And when you move into plenty, the question shift, becomes less about accumulation and more about intention. And this maps nicely onto Maslow's hierarchy of needs for those who understand that psychology model. But this is where another important dynamic comes in, and this is the balance between liquidity and legacy. Because at some point the question changes from what am I earning to what am I building that's going to last. Liquidity is about meeting today's needs, whereas legacies is much more about creating something for the longer term. It's your longer term value, and both are really important. The most effective approach isn't choosing one over the other. It's actually about designing a system that allows and enables both of these things to exist. In the book, I share an example of a senior leader who didn't make a sudden leap into a completely new job. She built a bridge, a financial scaffold, a safety net, maintaining income whilst gradually developing work that aligned more closely with her mission, creating financial stability alongside future opportunity, connecting that money and mission. There's that in itself is a very different approach to the older model, the more traditional model of success being framed around sacrifice, working harder, giving more time, delaying everything else because, we can enjoy it later in retirement. But that model is becoming less sustainable because for many, it's less desirable. What we're seeing now across different generations, cultures, countries, is there's a shift happening. There's a move towards integration where people want to build success and experience their life alongside it, not after it, and not at the expense of it. There's also an emotional layer to this paradigm because how you relate to money influences how you operate within the money mission paradigm. Some people carry a constant sense of not enough, actually, even when the numbers say otherwise. Others reach a point of financial security but struggle to use it. That tension between logic and emotion can quietly drive behaviour, which is why clarity matters and often why external advisors are really helpful here too. Because without clarity, more income doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes. It can simply lead to more complexity. So money and mission isn't just about earning or ambition. It's actually about building financial scaffolding that supports your life, making decisions that reflect what matters to you, and designing a system where income, impact, and direction all work together consistently and over time. So the second paradigm is mental and physical health. This is your capacity, your ability to think clearly, to manage pressure, and to sustain performance over time. And this is often the first area to come under strain, not because it's unimportant, but because it's often deprioritized. From a physiological perspective, capacity is heavily influenced by sleep, recovery, and overall physical health. Sleep research consistently shows actually that even moderate deprivation impacts our attention, our working memory, and our emotional regulation in a similar way that alcohol can. And if you feel it, it makes you think slower, it shortens your patience, and it reduces your ability to think and focus clearly. Your overall decision-making becomes less precise, and over time, that compounds. There's also a neurological component to this. When the brain is fatigued, it shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, focus, and regulation, and it relies much more on the reactive survival-based responses. So you're not operating from your best at your best, you're operating in a protection mode. From a psychological perspective, emotional regulation plays a central role. Research into emotional intelligence, for example, shows that those who can recognise and manage their emotional state actually perform much more consistently under pressure. They create space between stimulus and response. They don't eliminate pressure, they've just learned to navigate and manage and respond to it much more effectively. And that distinction really matters because in high performance environments, pressure is going to be there, it is going to be constant. The differentiator is how it's handled. There's also a strong link between physical movement and cognitive performance. Regular activity improves blood flow to the brain. It supports executive function and reduces stress-related symptoms. Even small, consistent inputs, movement, recovery, nutrition, have a measurable impact on mental clarity and our resilience. In my work, this is where the resilience advantage becomes really highly visible because resilience is much more than just mindset. It's about system management, how you build and learn to respond to pressure and challenge, how well you recover, how consistently you regulate, and how effectively you maintain capacity under load. When your levels of resilience start to drop, you become cognitively more clouded. Your emotional control reduces and you find it harder to make decisions. Energy also becomes much more inconsistent. Importantly, your tolerance narrows. Things that wouldn't normally affect you start to feel harder to manage or to sustain. This is where many high-performing individuals get caught out. They don't notice the gradual decline. They just compensate. They work harder. They push harder. They rely on the discipline that they've learnt to be able to just do. But that approach has limits. Performance without recovery isn't sustainable. In the book, I talk about the importance of protecting our capacity, not just driving output, because capacity is what enables everything else. Without it, even the best strategy becomes difficult to execute. And this is where integration really matters. Mental and physical health do not sit separately from performance or from each other. They underpin it. They determine your potential. They influence how you make decisions and how consistently you can operate at the level you expect of yourself. So this paradigm isn't a well-being add-on. It provides performance infrastructure, maintaining the level of capacity required to think clearly, lead effectively, and sustain results that matter to you over time. The third paradigm is work and life. This is your structure, how your time is organised, how your energy is used, and how your day-to-day reality actually plays out. This is often where pressure shows up most clearly. Too many demands, too many directions or distractions, and a constant sense that there's not enough time. But the real issue here isn't time, it's design. Because whether you realise it or not, your work and life are already structured. The question is, are they structured by default or by decision and purposeful design? And this is where trade-offs come in, because every choice you make is a trade-off. What you say yes to, what you say no to, what you allow to fill your time. I've worked with people who tell me that they used to love doing something, cycling, running, being outdoors, baking, but they haven't done it for years because life got busy. And when we look closer, it's not that there's no time, it's that something else has taken its place. So the question becomes, what are you choosing to do instead? And is it worth it? Because reintroducing something meaningful doesn't always require a complete overhaul. We don't need to go back to what we used to do, but you do need to go back and have a look and go, what can I change? How can I fit it in? A 100-mile bike ride could just be 8 or 10 or 2 on a weekend. Could you create a version that fits your current reality? Do you want to? Because that's design. The same applies to how you work. Many people structure their day around demands, but high performers structure them around energy. When are you at your best? When is your thinking sharpest? When is your focus strongest? And are you protecting that time, or are you just giving it away? Because your performance isn't just about how much you do, it's about when and how you do it. And then there's another layer to this, of course, it's the people around you. Really important here. Your environment isn't just physical, it's relational. Who you speak to, who you listen to, who influences your decisions. I often describe this as your virtual board of advisors, the people you go to for perspective, challenge, direction. And it's just worth asking yourself, do you have the right mix of people? Do you have somebody who understands your work? Do you have someone who can guide you financially? Do you have someone who gets your life outside of work? They understand your family, your interests, your priorities. Or are you just relying on voices that unintentionally hold you back? People who project their limits onto your goals or create doubt when there should be clarity. Because just like your time, your input matters, and not all input is useful. So part of calibrating work and life is being intentional about that, about what matters to you, about who you lean on, who you listen to, and where you choose to get guidance from. And finally, bringing it back to something really simple, is your diary. If somebody looked at your week without context, would they see the life you say you want, or just the one that you've drifted into? Because your calendar really tells the truth, doesn't it? It shows your priorities. It shows the trade-offs you're making. It is your design. And if it doesn't reflect what matters to you, then that's your signal. This paradigm it's not about rigid boundaries. It's about conscious choices, about recognizing what matters to you, creating the space for it on purpose. So consider the ripple effect, because this is where the calibration model becomes particularly powerful. It allows you to explore how the areas, these paradigms of money and mission and mental and physical health and work and life all interact. If pressure increases in your work-life structure, recovery time reduces. As recovery reduces, your mental and physical capacity drops. And as your capacity drops, your decision-making in money and mission become less effective. And this isn't just conceptual, it's how our human physiological systems actually operate. These interconnected variables influence each other over time, often with a delay, which means the impact isn't always immediate. It builds quietly at first, then more visibly. Nothing here exists in isolation. Each part of the system influences the others. And without a clear structure, those patterns are really, really easy to miss. Calibration gives you a way to see them earlier, to recognize where pressure is forming, and to respond before it starts to affect performance more significantly. So how does calibration differ from goal setting? Well, goals are useful. In fact, they're essential. They give direction, they provide focus, but they can be static. They don't always adjust when circumstances change. And in reality, conditions are always shifting. Workloads change, energy fluctuates, priorities evolve. Behavioural science shows that rigid goal structures become less effective in dynamic environments. Not because the goal is wrong, but because the context has changed around it. Calibration is different. It's ongoing and it's adaptive. It's responsive. It's working on a continuous feedback loop, aligning with your goal and providing the adaptive structure to enable you to achieve it in the most efficient and enjoyable way, with only conscious trade-offs. Instead of asking, am I hitting the goal? You're asking, what needs adjusting to stay effective so I will achieve the goal? That shift changes how you operate, from fixed to flexible, and from reactive to much more deliberate. So looping back to the 3 calibration tools that I mentioned earlier, to make all of this work in practice, the 3 core tools of emotional intelligence, skill communication, and the resilience advantage are really vital, because they sit within the model and cut across every area of your life. Emotional intelligence allows you to recognize what's happening, both internally and externally, and research consistently links emotional awareness and regulation to better decision-making, stronger leadership, and more consistent performance under pressure. Skill communication is the thing that allows you to respond clearly. It reduces ambiguity, it aligns expectations, and it prevents small issues from becoming larger problems. And resilience is what sustains the system, your system, over time. Not as a fixed trait, but as something that can be developed. Now, this is your ability, resilience, to maintain performance under pressure without depleting your capacity. Together, these tools increase focus, reduce friction, support consistent performance across all of the areas. All of them are explored more fully in the book and in my training courses, and also in our extended diploma in executive resilience and high performance leadership that we deliver through Illuminaire Executive Education. And I'll also be covering more on them in future podcasts if you're wanting to learn and develop your skills in any of these areas. So what are your next steps? Well, as you move through the podcast series, use the calibration model as your regular reference point. Come back to it often and ask yourself, where am I across these 3 key areas of money and mission, of mental and physical health, and of work-life balance and integration? Where is my alignment strong? Where is pressure starting to build? Because the signals are usually there much earlier than we think. We just don't always have the structure or time and space to step back and to see them clearly. And that's what the calibration model gives you, a way to step back, a way to understand what's really happening, and a way to respond with intent rather than to react under pressure. If you want to explore any of this further, everything we've covered sits at the heart of my book, Balancing Act Mastering Work, Wealth and Wellbeing, which is available from all major bookstores and on my website. Alongside that, you'll find a full resource hub on the website, lots of practical exercises, free downloadable tools, calibration tool, online free assessments, articles that go deeper into each of the areas discussed today that you can start to apply to your own world. If you've got specific questions, always feel free to contact me. Details are all on the website. And just remember that there is a strategy behind high performance and sustainable success. And it starts with mastering your own balancing act across work, wealth, and well-being. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in a future episode. You've been listening to The Balancing Act for mastering work, wealth, and well-being. You can head over to the website for further insight, links, and resources related to this episode at www.balancing-act.co.uk, and remember to subscribe to catch all the new episodes as they're released.